So I'm here to talk about a smartphone adapter. So I think some people know exactly what we're, whoops, that's the pointing thing, there we go, forward thing. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what a smartphone adapter is and why you might want one. And I'm going to compare the two, the iOptron option, which is the one I had before this one, and then we'll talk about the Celestron NexYZ adapter, and then a little Q&A to follow up on that. So this is really a kind of a mini product review, if you will, as opposed to a more comprehensive presentation tonight. So the basics of what is a smartphone adapter and why might you want to use one, it's essentially to help you with afocal photography. So in an afocal system, what you're doing is you already have some kind of an optical system, a telescope or a microscope or whatever it is, and that optical system is using a Mark I eyeball as its imaging device, if you will. So that eyeball is being put up to an eyepiece, and you're focusing it so that you're directly receiving the photons in your brain. So the idea with one of these is that you're actually putting a camera in place of the eyepiece. So the eyepiece is here. Right about here is the focal place where the eye would normally go, and instead we replace the eye with a camera. And that's how you get a straightforward, simple picture there. And you know, the camera itself is kind of taking what it's given, and so it's the eyepiece, the optical system here, that's controlling what magnification you might get as part of that process. If you look at how this kind of photography is done, essentially the key success factor, if you will, is to have a nice steady mount, because generally when we're taking astronomical pictures, things tend to be dim, they tend to be far away and so on, so it's really important to have a nice steady mount. And this is kind of a classic system that you might use where you have some kind of a mechanical device, and it allows you to position your camera in an exact location above an eyepiece that's attached to a telescope, and so you're accurately lining up that camera lens with the eyepiece. Obviously, the better the optical system, the better the picture is going to be, and it works really well on bright objects because usually cameras are taking shorter pictures, but you can, with a system like this with a DSLR, you could actually go 10, 20, 30 seconds and maybe get a more dim object in your picture if you wish. So most people these days, or at least the average person, is not thinking, when they think camera, they don't think one of these anymore. They're thinking a smartphone of some kind. And they're really everywhere. How many people here tonight did not bring their smartphone? How many? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, the rest of you all have smartphones. They're pretty well everywhere. Now, most of us are familiar with using them, familiar with taking selfies and other quick shots with them and so on. The lenses are awfully small, but the actual camera itself has got really, especially on the newer phones, it's got really good resolution, generally speaking. And they're coming in larger sizes now, so you're getting bigger pictures. You're able to check your focus more easily. And this is sort of to my overall theme here. They're the most likely kind of camera that you're going to find at a star party. In fact, I would challenge you to think, when was the last time you had a person come up to you at a star party with a DSLR in their back pocket? So that's not exactly what's going to happen. But if somebody wants to take a photo through your telescope, it's going to be with one of these. And I think that's really the biggest reason to have it. When I look at my sort of photographic equipment and my telescope inventory and so on, if I want to get the best possible picture, I'm not necessarily going to use a smartphone. But if I'm doing public outreach and I want to send someone home with a nice souvenir, then the smartphone is definitely the way to go. So, and it's not that bad. This is a comparison of two pictures of the full moon taken from the internet. So this one's a DSLR standard with a 400 speed ISO, just taking an automatic photograph, and this is an iPhone taking an automatic photograph. So when I look at the two moons there, I see both of them have a little bit of diffraction. There's a little bit of red at the top, a little bit of blue at the bottom. I'm able to see detail on one. One's a little more washed out than the other. You could fix both of those up maybe a little bit more, but overall, that's not a bad result. if what you want to do is just say, hey, I saw the moon tonight and it was pretty cool. That's really what you're looking for. So the key considerations if you're trying to use a smartphone, and I think Chris, when I was researching this, I came across your website. Chris knows all about how to do this the best, so talk to him afterwards. But essentially, one of the issues, especially with a full moon, is reducing glare. So you get a washed out photo, so you need to give yourself some tools perhaps to reduce that glare. A variable polarizing filter on the eyepiece would help with that. But a lot of the newer phones have both better cameras and optional software apps that allow you to take better pictures. And the key is what they call high dynamic range mode, where the phone will take an extremely bright object and an extremely black background, which is kind of what you see with a full moon, and it'll squeeze that high dynamic range down into something that the camera can deal with better, and you'll end up seeing more detail on the moon. You'll see a better result. And the other thing that I've noticed on my camera particularly is the ability to tap the camera for focus, and then I get that specific area focused in on, and then that tends to reduce the glare as well. So I get a better picture if I tell the camera, this is what I'm trying to take a picture of, particularly with brighter things. So it's one of those things that, you know, if you're trying to do this on your own, the better you know your camera, the better your results are going to be. But when you're trying to do this in a public engagement sort of opportunity, then you have to think about, well, you know, some people are going to be unsuccessful because they just don't know their camera that well. And if you know their particular camera model, you can help them out. But if not, you know, just continue to drive on. So we're going to talk about two mechanical adapters tonight. The one on the left is one from Ioptron that's been around for a little bit longer, and the one on the right is the NexYZ from Celestron, which is the one that I'm going to be focusing on a little bit more tonight. Just to sort of recap the Ioptron model, essentially this is made up of a couple of mechanical pieces. We've got here the eyepiece itself, which comes with this package. So this is an eyepiece that's presumably optimized for smartphone cameras in some way. The eyepiece goes in here, and then this mechanical adapter grips the camera and then positions the eyepiece over the camera on your phone. So this is an example of how you would set this up. So first you would clamp the smartphone onto the back here. Then you would position the eyepiece over your camera lens, and then you tighten the whole thing up with this thumb screw here, which clamps both the width of the thing that's holding the smartphone, as well as locking the position of this arm, which controls where the camera is going to go. And that's how it would look when it's deployed on the telescope there. I hope that all makes sense to everybody. Now, I do have an example of this adapter up here. So after the meeting, people will be welcome to have a look at that and get a feeling for how it looks and how it works. So the one thing I found about this is this works really well if you've got the time to sort of be finicky with it, because the fine adjustment part is you have to loosen off that thumb screw at the back, and then the whole thing becomes loose, and then you have to adjust it, and then you have to try and tighten it up again and get it, and you're moving it in 360 degrees of motion, because the camera can move in any which way as you're going along. We have some people with very large phones that doesn't quite work with the maximum width of the adapter, so it doesn't actually work for the really big ones. And what I found was that, and that's sort of the reason when I bought the NexYZ, was I was up at the CAO in, I think it was May or July. Anyway, I was acting as a supervisor, and I was helping somebody to try and get a camera picture on our main telescope there. So it was like I had one person with me, one camera, and I said, great, we have this adapter, we have this Ioptron adapter at the CAO, and I said, great, I'll get that adapter and we'll get a nice picture of the moon for you. And that was it was a terrifically frustrating experience. We could not get it to line up properly, even though I was working with a perfectly well-balanced, high-end telescope with robust optics and everything else like that. I found it was very frustrating to get it lined up properly and in a way that the person who was going to take that picture was going to enjoy. So we ended up getting a couple of so-so pictures, a little bit, but that person didn't walk away with a good experience, which set me up for wandering into KW Telescope and seeing a bunch of these on the counter. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. So I asked the person for a demonstration, and I realized that this actually addressed a lot of the issues that I was having with the Ioptron model, and did it in a kind of compelling kind of way. And I thought that was an example of a better mousetrap. The other thing that's interesting about it is the price points are really almost exactly the same. So both of these are under $100, sort of $75 to $85, depending on where you buy them and what currency you're paying. But overall, this is about the same amount of money. So the first thing that this has is it has a vertical axis adjustment on it. I'll just go grab it here so we can show that for the audience, so that you can work to get your camera up and down closer. See that? Goes up, comes down. So I can get my camera lens the optimal distance away from the eyepiece. So when I'm doing that adjustment, what I'm actually doing is I'm sort of expanding or contracting my field of view on the phone, so I'm seeing more or less of what my target is. So that's kind of a nice feature. That's the vertical adjustment. The other adjustments are down here, and this is the ones that you would use most of the time, in the sense that this allows you to do horizontal and vertical adjustments to position that camera in exactly the right spot. So you're actually able to, start by putting the phone on this adjustment, get your height roughly the way you want it, and then the final adjustment is just going to be to get that camera lens in exactly the right spot there. And the degrees of adjustment is very fine. So I find that I'm able to precisely put it in exactly where I want to do it. There's an eyepiece clamp here, which you can see in operation. So this is designed to handle both 1 1/4 and 2-inch eyepieces. So it can be quite large and quite small. And the phone cradle is essentially, it's a spring-loaded option here. So I can just whip the phone out like that, and then put the next phone in, and do some adjustments, and say, okay, take a picture. So that's, again, thinking public ed, that's exactly the experience I want to have, that I'm not fumbling around or dropping somebody's phone in the dark, that I want to present this appearance that I actually know what I'm doing, and I'm actually somebody who's competent to handle somebody else's phone. And then the other thing that's nice about this is there's an actual, what I would call a clamp lock. So you put the clamp on, and it's loose, but then there's another adjustment here that allows you to tighten that clamp so that this whole unit here is firmly attached to your telescope, finder scope, or binoculars. So I've seen this on the web where people have actually put this on one side of a binocular to get a nice wide field of view and take pictures with that in that way. So the whole unit has been nicely engineered and nicely designed for its purpose. It's kind of cool. So just in terms of the way I see this, it's one of the things that's nice, and especially compared to the Ioptron, is this is one piece. The Ioptron has 3 different pieces that you have to put together in the right way and tighten in exactly the right way for it to work. The 3 axes of adjustment, which is where the X, Y, Z comes from, the left, right, and vertical, it's nicely built in. It's a good design. It really is nice and tight on the scope. So I'm actually, I can shake this a little bit, and I'm really limited by how tightly my eyepiece is attached to the scope here, not by anything else. So it allows me to have a bit of confidence that when I'm doing public outreach and so on, that this is not going to drop either their phone or my eyepiece. Specs say it goes 30 to 60 millimeters in diameter, and it should work on everything. There's adapters that come with the package that allow you to put this on microscopes as well. So if you wanted to take pictures of microscopy as well, that's an option. So obviously that's not something that we're doing, but that's something that some people might want. So the one thing I would say is a bit of a drawback is it is a bit heavy. So when I compare it particularly with the Ioptron, which is a very lightweight piece of gear, this is a bit heavier. It does need a strong mount connection. So this eyepiece really needs to be firmly attached if this is going to work well and not slip, but that's something that's easy to do. I really like how easy it is to make the fine adjustments. I was just trying it out in the parking lot, got some very nice pictures with it. And I think that the other thing that you could do with this is if you are doing this in public ed and you want it to be multitasking, I can leave the eyepiece on, swap an actual eyepiece in and say, would you like to have a look for yourself? Okay, let's put this back and we'll put a camera on. So I'm able to do that kind of a scenario. And if I have, a matching pair of eyepieces, I could actually not even worry about the focus on the scope. So I'm hoping that all of this put together is going to lead to a really nice experience my next few star parties, and hopefully I can be the guy who will be there to allow people to shoot the moon. So there we go. So that's my story. Now John Bodanovich has graciously volunteered to be the keeper of this kit here. And so John's going to allow people after the meeting, if you want to go out in the parking lot and muck around with this and try it out, then he will relay it back to me afterwards. So John, thank you very much for helping with that. And I'll just throw it open to see if there's any questions at this point. Yeah.
Thanks, Dad. Sounds great. I can't wait to get my hands on one of those. It's also great if you want to show a group what the telescope's looking at. So you can actually, I know a lot of people want to put their eye to the eyepiece, but it's also one way that a group could see an event, say an occultation or something where the star's going to blink out or reappear.
Put it on video mode.
Everybody can have a look, and you could video it at the same time. You could record it.
Nice idea, yeah.
How well do the three fine adjustments lock, or is there a way to lock them in place?
They don't actually lock. They do tend to be, there's a certain amount of stiction there. So they're not, they don't tend to move. And when you do move them, it takes a deliberate movement to move them. But I don't see any option to tighten anything up there. I think it's something that's just designed to sort of work in a specific way. It's rack and pinion sort of gears that are driving this mechanism, and that might be a weak point, but I don't see anything right now that causes any worries. Part of it too is that if you're on a telescope, you're going to be sort of in a resting position like that, so you should hopefully not be putting a lot of force in any one direction that would cause it to migrate by itself. Yeah.
We have a question from online. Peter asked if you've tried the Carson Hookups 2.0.
The Carson Hookups? No, I haven't heard of that particular model.
Okay. Sorry. Further to that, he mentioned that it was highly recommended on Amazon, but unfortunately didn't work too well with his larger iPhone 8.
Well, I think this, I've seen online reviews of this and videos with an iPhone 6, so I don't know what the scale up between the 6 and the 8 is, but certainly I have seen it used successfully with some iPhones, and so I would suggest that perhaps if, like what I noticed when I was researching this talk is there's a lot of people that have their own reviews and things online, so if you want to research a specific phone combination, you can probably find somebody who's tried it and would give you some specific feedback to our viewer out there. Michael.
Yeah, so Dennis, I've got to imagine that the vast majority of people who are going to do this are going to be shooting the moon, rather than other objects, even bright planets, because they're so very small in most telescopes. And so, obviously the telescope is going to be, aimed up, and you're probably going to be using then a star diagonal, right, as opposed to having to look up. That being the case, your users who may not be familiar with astronomy are going to have flipped images of the moon, right?
Right.
And they're going to have to be told that and understand that. Just something that I think
So I have to explain the mirror, the whole mirror flip thing,
yeah,
three or four
entire thing
reflections.
is flipped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could see that. I think most people are just happy to see some craters. I think that's generally what that's what I've been finding is it's like, wow, I got craters. Look, I got craters. But you're right. The ones that are paying attention are going to go, the moon's that way and the moon's this way. Well, what's that all about? So yeah, we'll see. I'm anxious to sort of see how it goes. I'll have my first star party opportunity on Saturday, so I'll see how it goes, and I'll let you know the next time I'm here. Yes, sir.
other people want to take a look, there's another example. I've set it up on an 1.25" eyepiece.
Okay.
I do have a 2-inch eyepiece with me that if you want to see it put on a 2-inch eyepiece, you can do that too.
Yeah. And what's been your experience with it so far?
The problem that I've had was that the clamp on an 1.25" eyepiece, it has to be held square in order to see through it. And my first experience was I had an eyepiece that had a rubber ring.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I couldn't get it in the dark square enough. I could play around with it at dusk,
Yeah.
but not at night. What I have found is if you put, a little rubber shim or foam or other things on it, you can do that. But trying to do this, learning how to do this in the dark is not a successful experience for me.
I think that's a general rule for almost every piece of astronomy equipment, but you're quite right.
Okay.
But I think that kind of comes back to what I was suggesting too, is that for public education, I think this combination with a specific eyepiece should be locked and loaded before my first guest arrives, and I shouldn't be mucking around with that and changing it up because I think that's sometimes how we fail is people say, "Oh, could you also look at Saturn too?" And it's like, "Oh, okay, sure, I can do that." And then what ends up happening is you end up losing a lot of time moving from one target to another, and then something goes wrong. And I'm planning to really stick with one thing on Saturday. I'm just going to be focusing on the moon, and I'm going to be offering pictures, and I'll see how that goes. But we'll see whether that works out or not. Yes, sir.
Pretty excited about everything that you're showing us, especially this mount. My first experience with taking pictures of the moon with my cell phone was 2 years ago, when my sister had given me an 8x magnifier to attach to the cell phone. And then I put that in a Barlow.
Okay.
And then I put that in my mount, and I was able to get a perfect focus. So with moving the mount around with the remote, and taking a picture with a selfie stick, the Bluetooth part of the selfie stick, I was able to get perfect focus. And I wasn't able to get the whole moon. I would only get parts of the moon,
Right.
which means I got the craters absolutely crisply and the shadows and everything. So that's the first point. Second point, I was part of the solar eclipse team in London. I'm part of the London Astronomical Society there too.
Oh, welcome. Yeah, welcome here.
Thanks, and I'm also a member here now.
Oh, great.
I've
okay.
moved here.
Okay.
And there were 7 or 8 of us with telescopes, and we had 7,000 people show up on the hill at the university.
Right.
So from 1 o'clock till 4 o'clock, at each telescope, we had a lineup of 250 to 300 people. And every one of them had a cell phone, and every one of them wanted to take a picture. We were remarkably successful, even with just hand holding. If people would get embarrassed and would want to move away, I insisted that they stay there until they took a picture, because they'd been in the lineup for at least 45 minutes.
Sure, good.
So they all got good pictures. I had a Canon with an adapter, a 2-inch adapter, in the eyepiece holder, and I kept that on for the whole time. It seemed to show a much better picture through the eyepiece, when people looking through the eyepiece, than anything else I had. There was a guy there from the London Free Press who also had a Canon. So sure enough, I switched my camera out, switched his camera in, and he got some beautiful pictures that he published later on.
Yeah.
Another, I'm just mentioning this because there's other ways of doing this at star parties. People will come to you with SD cards.
Yes.
Well, you take your SD card out of your camera, you put that in their SD card in your camera, you shoot away, give them their SD card back. It works.
Yeah.
It just works. Yeah.
Just requires a bit of preparation on the part of the person who's coming, but yeah, if you're able to do that, that's a great way to do it too.
Well,
yeah.
I wasn't prepared for any of this. Any of this. I thought I'd have an eyepiece and people would be looking through an eyepiece.
Yeah.
But I ended up with the only time lapse, enough pictures to do the time lapse of the
Cool.
thing.
Nice. Well, that's a
There's
great
other
story.
ways of
Thank you
doing
for sharing.
things, yeah.
Thank-
But I'm going to get one of those. And
Well, now you can try before you buy, because we've got
I'm
2
in
of them.
Waterloo tomorrow.
Excellent. Okay.
Any more questions?
Going once. One more. Got a couple. Yes, sir.
You mentioned autofocus. You're pretty happy with that.
Yeah.
Do you use auto exposure too?
That's the part I'm not as familiar with my camera's controls, and I was sort of mentioning that everything I read online said if you can get the high dynamic range, if you can control your exposure, then you will get a better picture, because often the moon will get blown out kind of thing unless you filter it. And I know Chris has got more information on that, but it depends a lot on how old your camera is and what settings it has available, because each model kind of adds a few more options in terms of controls, and being able to set like a shutter speed or an ISO value makes a huge difference in terms of what you're able to do. But I found, like in my camera's case, it was blown out, but if I focused on that specific area and if I can make the picture of the moon fill most of the screen, then the automatic exposure adjustment will kick in, right? It's when you've got a lot of black and it's trying to balance things the way it likes to that you end up with things like Jupiter being blown out and so on. All right, well, thank you very much, everybody. I'm sorry I have to go, but hockey season is on again. So we'll see you in the spring, but hopefully before then. Thank you.